Welcome back. So first up, I wanted to thank everybody for their comments on the last video, and also the people who emailed me and texted me and everything. So it was a lot and too many for me to reply to everybody, but I've taken note of what everybody said, and I've also had more time to think about the different things I need to look at the aircraft. And I've also had time to talk with Mark and a couple of other different people, Bill and Lloyd and a few other different people, and just go over what I think is going on with the various aspects of the aircraft and how I can make improvements. So let me go over those for you first, just to summarize sort of all the different things that need to be addressed, and then I'll get into a little bit more detail. Alright, so let's start with the cooling. And first of all, the reason why I had that intake scoop in the closed position was because I didn't have a back wall on there. So as you can see in there, and you will see a little bit later, there the little baffles in there that direct air down into the intercooler and the radiator. They sort of rely on the scoop being closed in order to catch the air, and if the scoop's open, you can see there's quite a large gap above them. And so the reason why I had the scoop closed was basically to force the air through there, but without having a back wall on there, which you'll see I'm in the process of resolving, the air was able to sort of go over the top of that. But the other problem was too, given that the aircraft was now flying with about a 5-degree alpha, there's a potential, as you can see here, that's with the scoop open now and standing in front of the nose. If that air isn't following the roof line, it's just going to skip over the top of that scoop. So I'm going to be putting some tufting there, and doing some runs down the runway, and potentially the next time I just take it into ground effect, I'll be able to see that the air is flowing in there. But from now on, now that you'll see that I've got the back wall in there, the scoop will stay in the open position for takeoff and climb out. So that should make an improvement, and you'll see more detail on what I've done with that shortly. But that job is pretty much completed now, and I'm going to go and test it here shortly. With the other respect to the cooling too, one of the things I'm going to be doing in order to give me some more time for climb out is up in the nose in here. I'm going to put right down in here, I'm going to put 2.5 gallon tanks, aluminum tanks, that are going to basically contain coolant and be tied into the heater loop. And right now I think I have about 3 gallons of total coolant in the system. And by adding in another 5 gallons, that'll more than double the amount of time it takes before I basically hit peak temperature. So it should give me plenty of time to at least climb up to 1,000 feet before I have a temperature problem. And then obviously with the having the air sorted out over here, that's going to make a difference as well. And hopefully the combination of the two will make my coolant problem less of a problem. And the other thing I can do over here too that I still haven't done yet is I've got the cowling vent under there, and also the gap here where the air can come out here. Or potentially I could cut another 3/4 of an inch to an inch off of this and open this gap up, at least another 1/4 of an inch, maybe 3/8 of an inch there, and allow more air to come out here. But I'm going to be putting some tufts on here and also down on here, just to see how the air is flowing out of that as well, and hopefully just make sure I'm getting really good airflow through the engine compartment. Alright, so that pretty much covers what I'm doing with the cooling, at least initially, and we'll see how that all goes, and I'll be able to look on the engine logs to see what sort of performance I'm getting, because I have temperature sensors everywhere I need to have them. So we'll see how that works out. And next up is the handling. So the aircraft felt to me like what was happening was every now and then the main wing on one side or the other would just sort of lose lift. That's kind of how it felt to me. It didn't feel like the foreplane was doing anything weird. In fact, you look at the elevator and there's nothing going on there. It's all fairly stable. But it really felt like the main wing was sort of all of a sudden just losing lift, and that was why initially I was thinking, oh well, it kind of feels a little bit like thermals, but it was way too consistent to be thermals really. So this is what my thoughts are, and let me cover it in more detail here. So first of all, the aircraft was flying with a static margin of about 7.9%, and I'd like to basically take that up to about 10%. So what that means is basically the CG was aft more than really, you know, what it could be. So what I'm going to do is that the weight that I'm going to put in the nose there with a 5 gallon of coolant and the, you know, all the hardware and stuff associated with that, it's going to add up to over 50 pounds. And so I'll have that weight in there, and then the 100 pounds that's sitting under the seat, I'm going to take out 50 pounds of that. So now I'm not increasing the weight at all, I'm just moving it forward. So that the coolant set up in the nose there is basically going to have two purposes there. And you know, one to buy me extra time on the engine with climb out, and second to get the CG more forward. So what that'll end up doing is it'll load this guy up more, so a lot more you know, of the lift being put on here, and that'll mean that the elevator will need to run in more of a downward position for climb out, and that's kind of what I want, because it's been pretty much neutral, sort of like, you know, like this position here, pretty much neutral for the climb out. And really for that airspeed, it should have a little bit of down deflection in there, because ultimately you want it to be sort of neutral when you're in cruise. So moving the CG forward, you know, should improve all the handling, because it's reducing the amount of lift required for the wing to generate. So it means the wing can run at a lower alpha. It doesn't have to be as steep. So instead of 5 degrees, it can be, you know, 3 degrees or 3.5, 4 degrees. Basically, it's a less of an alpha. So that should improve the stability as well. But then really what it felt like was these wheel wells in here was what was causing half the problem. So if you have a quick look in there, you can see, get the camera around the right way, you can see how big the wheel wells are there. You know, this is my hand on the back wall there, you know, they're big. So but if you look at when you're basically 0 alpha, this is what you see when you're running 0 alpha. You can barely see that back wall, and in fact when I did it a long time ago and I put tufts in there, what was happening was the air was coming in here at just when you're running along the runway, and it was spiraling around in here and, you know, just creating a whirlpool, and there wasn't any disturbances going back behind it. Everything was just sort of skipping down underneath. But as soon as you got the nose up a little bit, there was some spillage happening here, and that was only just with maybe 1 degree alpha, when I was just sort of lifting the nose a little bit with the elevator and not actually getting it all the way off. So I'm pretty sure that, you know, when it gets to about 5 degrees alpha, there's a lot of turbulence going on here. It's all hitting this back wall and doing all sorts of weird stuff, and it may be doing it inconsistently. Maybe potentially one wheel well is doing something, and all of a sudden there's a big bunch of air that just sort of fluctuates in here, and it causes this wing to drop or lift, and then, you know, the other one doesn't have the same thing happening at the same time, and that would explain a little bit why it felt like it was sort of, you know, hitting bumps on one side and not the other. So what I'm going to do here is I've got some channel, little L channel here, and I'm going to take a piece of L channel and just temporarily tape it across here in order to deflect. So it'll be like a V, basically, you know, like down like that, just to create a ramp there to deflect the air down underneath the wheel well. And I'm going to tuft all this again and try it out on the runway just with 0 alpha, and try it with, you know, taking the nose off just a little bit, or at least taking the weight off the nose, and just see what happens here, see if it's having the desired effect. Because, you know, obviously I need to have a solution that works all the time, because you can't just go and block these up. I mean, I could for testing and prove that that's the problem, but I'd rather spend my time you know, tufting all this and seeing exactly what's going on. And if I still run out of ideas, then potentially I'll cover that up for a test. But that's, you know, a bit of work to cover that up with something that's not going to just blow out of there. You know, there's nothing to, you know, really stick it to. I've got a bit of tape and stuff, but anyway, I have to cut a shape, and that's a whole bunch of work. So I'm going to try just seeing if I can resolve the problem with a, you know, with a little lip here to deflect the air, and see how that plays out. So again, just wanted to show you that one more time. So this is basically 0 alpha, looking at that wheel well. So you don't really see a lot of exposure there, and that's why it just creates that whirlpool with the air in there. But if you come to about, you know, 5 degrees nose up, then all of a sudden you've got a lot of exposure in there, and so that's, I think, what's causing the problem. But anyway, we'll see once it's all tufted. And some other people had mentioned this, and I thought about this when I did the design. The position of the foreplane in the vertical compared to the main wing. If you're standing and looking at sort of 0 alpha there, it's pretty much the level there. I'm pretty sure at this point at 0 alpha, the way I designed it, and I did all the flow analysis, that all the air running over the top there ends up going underneath the main wing. Potentially when you're at a higher alpha like this, it could be deflecting back and disturbing the main wing, but that's something we'll see when I have this all tufted. I'll basically tuft the foreplane here and also the main wing back there, and we'll be able to see exactly what's going on with respect to all of that. Alright, something else that may have been a problem too is that in the fuel tanks, in here in the straight tanks, there's baffles in here, and they have fairly large mouse holes in the bottom corners to allow the fuel to flow from one side, one compartment to the other when you're filling it up, but also obviously when you're draining. When you're filling it up, you probably need fairly large ones in order so you don't just fill up one cavity and it takes forever to fill up the others. You need them to be able to fill up fairly quickly. Unfortunately, when you're motoring down the runway and the fuel wants to move backwards, if the mouse holes are big, the fuel can move fairly quickly, and I think that's what's happening. I actually looked on my fuel gauges on the G3X, and when I accelerated down the runway, the fuel, like in this tank, went from 6 to 10. So about 50% higher up on that little capacitance gauge thing that's in the back cavity there, or in the center cavity there, basically increased. So all that fuel moved back there. So that moves the CG back. Not a lot because the CG is close to here, but potentially it's causing another problem. So there's a couple of things I can do. I can do a test. The next test I can do is basically just 1 gallon of fuel in that tank, and I've still got 10 gallons in the header tank. So if I'm just going to fly around the pattern, it's no big deal. The other thing that I'm going to do that may resolve the problem is I'm going to get some of this the foam that you put in fuel tanks to stop the fuel sloshing around. I'm not going to fill the whole tank with it. I don't need to do that, but because I've got baffles in there anyway. But what I'm going to do is put a big sort of a chunk of that foam, shove it in the mouse hole, and that'll stop the fuel from rapidly transferring from one cavity to another. So that's another little job that I have to do, and again I can prove that and eliminate the fuel just by if we're doing a test, just by having the tanks basically empty and just running off the header tank. So we'll see how that plays out. And lastly, one other thing I didn't talk about yet was the potential of putting these vortilons here to stop any span wires flow, and that's still going to be a possibility, but I'll wait and see. I'll tuft everything first and see if there's a problem here, if I'm getting any span wires flow, just in ground effect or whatever, before I actually go trying to add those, because they may not be necessary. We'll see. Alright, so there's probably a couple of other little changes that I forgot to mention too, but if they are, they're really minor, so we'll focus on these ones first. So I'm going to be working on the cooling, as you'll see here in a minute, and then I've got the materials already coming to make those coolant tanks, I hope to get those welded up. It won't take me too long. I don't think. I've got a local shop that's going to be able to do that for me, so maybe by the end of the week I'll have that stuff to the shop. And the rest of the stuff, the tufting and everything like that, that'll come sort of in the course of the next couple of days, and we'll see how things go. So let's have a look and see how this cooling is working now with this new ducting. Alright, so I started this back wall project initially just by creating a cardboard template that was going to be the wall, and made it so it slides in there and lines up with the back of the radiator, and the intercooler is above that, and so it fits the shape of the inside of the inlet scoop as well. So that's basically how I'm going to start, and this is what it looks like when the scoop is shut, although this is in the open position, fully open position, so you see it sort of closes up all that gap there. And I ended up trimming it down and actually making it a bit smaller than this, as you'll see here shortly. So that's how it ended up being, and then that opening there is for the inlet for the engine, for the air intake. And so this is how it is out of aluminum now. So I've basically cut it out of just some sheet aluminum on the bandsaw and mocked that little opening up there, and the idea is to rivet that into place for the air intake for the engine. So that's kind of how that's going to look. And then I've got some rubber there that I'm going to put around the outside edge, so you can see I've done that now, and that rubber sort of seals off the opening there, so everything sort of tucks in nicely. And this actually still works when the inlet scoop is put down. The whole thing can sort of flex a little bit. So this is how it looks there with the flexible tubing on there. That's just 3-inch sort of ducting, aluminum ducting there. And I put some safety wire on there to hold it, because I wasn't really sure that clamp would hold everything on there, even though there shouldn't really be a lot of pressure on there. It should just be ambient plus a little bit of forced air from 100 knots or whatever running down there. But anyway, I didn't want it to fall off, so I'm going to use that safety wire to hold it on there. And seeing that I've sort of done away with the air filter temporarily, I needed something to stop any large objects from going all the way down into the turbo there. So this little bit of mesh grid there should work, and potentially later on I could just sort of put an air filter in front of this opening. So this is what it looks like, all sort of put into place here with all the rubber around the edge, and I've taped up the lower edges there with some metal tape to stop any air from sort of escaping anywhere, and I've got it ducted there through the tube. And I've still got my sensors there that I'm hooking up there, of the temperature and pressure sensors, so I can actually see what the ambient temperature ends up being like going in there, and also what the pressure is. Okay, so I've placed a bunch of wool tufts around the inlet and the outlet area there, and see what happens with respect to the air moving. And the engine struggled to start that time, but got it running again. So as you can see there on the outlet, definitely pulling air through that cowling vent, and also the opening between the cowling and the prop spinner. And then up the front here, because the wind outside was just blowing, I needed to go and it was blowing sort of on the nose of the aircraft. I needed to go and move those tufts around so they were going on the inside there. So as you'll see, I just got out and quickly checked those and then adjusted them. But overall, you can see it's pulling air through there. It's not just the air blowing from the wind there. It actually is pulling air even with it just at idle. And when the fans come on in there, when the temps come up a little bit, even that pulls air, as you'll see here at the end of this run. But overall, I think looking out at the outlet there, that looks pretty good. It's not like it's the ones there at the cowling vent are sort of following the fuselage so much. They're pulling almost straight out, so there's definitely a low pressure there pulling everything. This is just about to sort of bring the power up a little bit here, just to about 1300 RPM. And you can see even at that, it's definitely good air being pulled there, at least that's my opinion. And if you look at that one telltale on the right hand side that's on the outside of the cowling there, or the inlet scoop, when I run up to full power, that actually gets sucked in around the corner there. You'll see in a second once I actually start bringing it up to full power. So there's definitely some air being pulled in there. So watch that one right now, one on the right hand side on the outside of the cowling. There, it just gets pulled in, so there's definitely air being drawn in there, enough to basically suck that around the side there. I don't know, I guess I'll get your guys' opinion, but it looks to me like the air's flowing pretty nicely through there right now, in and out. Don't see too many problems there. Those telltales that are put on the roof there ahead of the inlet scoop, a little bit stuck there, but those are mainly for when I'm running down the runway later to see exactly what that's doing. So I did this run, same as what I did before. The one thing I didn't do was I didn't turn on the fuel heat loop. but I did turn on the cabin heater, and I wanted to see again sort of, you know, how much time I had with running at full power and then, you know, pulling the power back. And as you'll see coming up here, the ambient temperatures are now pretty much following what the outside temperature is all the way through the run. And then once the power's off, you see the temperature on the ambient starts to rise a little bit, and I think just because there's some heat radiating up off of the intercooler and the radiator, and that's being pulled in to the engine through that new inlet. But in general, I think I've got a little bit more time out of this now that it's, you know, pulling all the fresh air directly through the radiator. But that's, you know, it's really difficult to tell how much of an improvement it's making. What'll be the test is doing some runs down the runway and see how it is, you know, when there's ram air being forced in there, you know, when it's doing sort of, you know, 80 knots down the runway. But overall, I think I ended up with about 2 minutes and 10 seconds, of which 90 seconds of that was full power, and then, you know, I slowly backed it off, as you'll see. And then you can see that telltale actually comes back on the outside there, just with the wind blowing on the outside. So there's definitely air being pulled in there now, so hopefully that'll make a difference. Alright, so engine's cooled down here, and I'm just about to shut it down, and you'll see that even after the shutdown, the fans that are on the condenser and also the one on the radiator are still actually pulling air through there, enough to keep the telltales moving. So have a look here. There you can see it's still moving some air through there, even just with those fans, but the prop definitely pulls a lot more air through there, as you'd expect. So, you know, I think I'm pretty happy with that. I don't know how I could improve it anymore without, you know, making a major change. And here's the run again, but just showing the engine information, so you can see how the temps and everything vary. As you can see there on the very bottom there, when I turn the heater on, that pulls the coolant temperature way down there, and, you know, buys me a lot more time. Now when I have that extra 5 gallons on board, that should last a lot longer in terms of keeping the coolant temps cool. And as you see there, the oil temp ended up still getting to 250, you know, just because that's kind of where I took it to in terms of the power. The turbine inlet temperature there went to about 1688. I'm okay with that. And then the coolant temp, you know, was basically ended up going to about 230, I think, altogether. You know, and obviously, you know, I'd already taken the power back. But yeah, as I said, got about 2 minutes and 10 seconds altogether, of which 90 seconds of that was full power, and then I sort of slowly backed the power down there, as you'll see. So yeah, once I have that extra coolant on board, extra 5 gallons, that'll make a difference. And obviously, hopefully, running down the runway and having all that air now being forced in through the radiator, and they also have the ambient temperature. You can see that even now, right now, 89 degrees. It was actually 87 outside, so the ambient air temperature is definitely better now. It's not rising up. The other day when I had the run, it went up to 109, and it started out at 80 degrees. So it went up 29 degrees. Here it's only going up maybe 2 degrees there. So that's made a big difference, and, you know, that in general keeps the whole engine cool, because I'm, you know, sending a much cooler engine temperature into the engine, sorry. And as I said, I didn't put the fuel heat loop on, so I didn't get any benefit from the secondary intercooler. Next time I do it, I'll run that again, and that should help things as well, because that normally cools things down by about another 30 degrees, the temps going into the engine. Anyway, that's this update. Hopefully you found it interesting. Tune in again and see where I'm at with respect to getting this extra coolant stuff done and the other things that I talked about. So thanks again for watching, and we'll see you again on the next one. Cheers.